I could call this place home. Chapter 2, Sidewalk Chalk Art. The summer air felt sticky and hot. Green Hills was in the middle of a brutal heat wave. The temperature had hardly dropped below 90s for days. The occasional breeze caused the citizens of the small town to throw open their windows to get some fresh air blowing through the beating heat. Knuckles sat on the front steps of the house, listening to the deafening chorus of cicadas that filled the treetops above. He did really need to be sitting in the direct sun, but the Echidna had insisted that he keep an eye on Sonic while Maddie got some work done on the back porch. Tails was inside, helping Tom make lunch while Ozzy took a long nap out back, keeping Maddie company. That left Knuckles looking after Sonic in the front, out in the hot sun. Knuckles wiped his sweaty brow as he watched his brother, who was kneeling in the driveway, small sticks of bright colors surrounding him as he grabbed and discarded them frequently. Knuckles had been watching this scene for a while, and still had no idea what Sonic was doing.
It would be wise to accompany him,
Knuckles thought, glancing at the moving forms of Tails and Tom through the windows before leaving his post on the hot front steps and into the paved driveway. Sonic heard his footsteps approaching from behind and turned to face the Echidna.
Hey, Knux, look!
The hedgehog waved him down to kneel beside him and gestured to the sidewalk. There was colorful dust smeared all over the hedgehog, coating his white gloves. Knuckles stared at the pavement, where Sonic had drawn several shapes and figures everywhere in a 5-foot radius. The hedgehog had drawn bright yellow stars and lightning bolts, scattered everywhere in between other figures that Knuckles recognized. Despite their crude nature, two tall people were smiling and holding hands. He immediately recognized them as Tom and Maddie, along with the Ghent yellow dog between them as Ozzy. Sonic had drawn other recognizable figures as citizens of Green Hills that they saw nearly every day. There was Crazy Carl, wait on his scooter. That old woman with all the Dachshunds, everyone. Knuckles smiled as he spotted a drawing of Tails, bright orange with a smiling face and huge fluffy tails behind him. He saw a red figure that he instantly recognized as himself, with long red quills and spiky gloves, a crude determined smile on his face. He mirrored the expression as he stared down at himself, then turned back to Sonic with a fond expression. Sonic was back to work, tongue out as he scribbled on an obvious self-portrait. The drawing had sunglasses on, and a chilly dog in each hand. He was working on drawing cool flames in the background. This whole practice seemed a bit silly, and yet, Knuckles felt a strange sense of sentiment looking out at the drawings of his new family.
I try.
Knuckles asked, gazing at the scattered colored sticks all around Sonic. The hedgehog turned, smiling wide.
Yeah, of course you can.
He picked up a green stick and held it out to the Echidna.
Here, take the green chalk. I don't need it right now.
He got back to scribbling. Knuckles took the green chalk and kneeled down a few feet away from Sonic. After thinking for a moment, he began to draw. The dusty chalk had a strange texture that he wasn't sure he liked, and sometimes it squeaked unpleasantly against the driveway, but as he scribbled, he became more focused on what the colors were creating in front of him. The two boys sat in silence, drawing as the sun beat down and the cicadas screamed from above. Knuckles occasionally grabbed other colors from the pavement to suit his needs, and eventually sat up on his knees and admired his work.
Sonic.
He called to his brother, whose ears stood up as he turned towards Knuckles.
I've completed my chalk creation. Look upon my work.
Sonic shuffled over on his hands and knees, gazing at Knuckles' handiwork. The Echidna grinned ear to ear, watching Sonic's impressed expression as he looked on. Knuckles had created a colorful cacophony of blended chalk dust, using his gloves to stir up the dust and create what looked like an explosion. He had created several of these clouds of dusty gradients, and also drawn shapes that were obviously inspired by Sonic's art on the other side of the drive. There were different colored bolts of lightning, and even Knuckles' own version of himself and his two younger brothers. Sonic noticed that Knuckles had given his self-portrait a tall ice cream cone in one hand, which made him smile wider. On the other end, the Echidna had also scribbled out more shapes, with less color. A shape that looked an awful lot like the symbol of the Master Emerald, with a little red Knuckles sleeping on top of it, little blue stars rising from it. Sonic burst into laughter when he spotted a drawing of the bald head and bushy mustache of Dr. Robotnik, with his tongue sticking out and green stink lines coming off him.
You got a man spot on Nux.
The Echidna chuckled at that, proud of himself for his humorous caricature. He was hoping Sonic would get a laugh at that one. Sonic spotted one more drawing, two red figures, one larger, and tossing the smaller one up in the air. They both had smiles on their faces. Sonic stared at it for a moment, then turned to look at his brother.
This is you and your dad?
Sonic asked, nodding his head towards the drawing. Knuckles nodded slowly, staring at the drawing.
One of my fondest memories of my father. He always told me this exercise was simply to build his strength, but every time I asked, he would oblige.
He smiled down at his art.
He was a fine warrior, one of the most dedicated in our entire tribe.
Sonic put his hand on Knuckles' shoulder.
Sounds like he was a pretty good dad, too.
Knuckles nodded his head again, smiling. The boys sat together in silence for a few minutes. The trees above began to sway as a cool, welcome breeze blew through their fur. Moments later, the front door opened and the boys turned to see Tails bounding out the door, smiling.
Sonic, Knuckles, Tom, and I made lunch. We've got watermelon and lemonade and tomato sandwiches.
The fox jumped off the porch, hovering in the air before flying around the side of the house to meet Maddie and Ozzy. Tom walked down the steps, a platter of sandwiches in his hands as Sonic and Knuckles stood up from the driveway. The man stopped between the two boys and admired the art that covered the pavement.
Wow.
The man exclaimed, beaming at the colorful drive.
I've got to say, this driveway has never looked so beautiful. You're a culinary artist.
Tom pat Sonic on the shoulder, making him stumble and fall against his side. Laughing, Sonic spotted Tails waving at him from the backyard and raced around the house in a blue blur. Tom looked down at Knuckles, smiling. He tousled the fur on top of the Echidna's head in a gesture of pride. The comforting weight on his head gave the boy a strong sense of reminiscence to another time. He smiled softly, remembering.
Well, Knuckles.
Tom said, breaking the silence.
Let's go get some watermelon before your brothers devour the whole thing.
Knuckles nodded, following Tom into the backyard to enjoy lunch with his family.